A song by Daniel Niemod, sung by Bill Brooks.
That one power invisible, and you see it everywhere and every day. One power indescribable, and you speak of it with every word you say. Mysterious until you know the truth. As simple as the love inside of you. Call it God, call it Spirit, call it Jesus, call it Lord, call it Buddha, Baha'u'llah, angel's wings or heaven's door. But whatever name you give it, it's all one power, can't you see? It's the power of the we speak so many languages, have different clothing, different colors, different names. But different is only dangerous when we forget that in the heart we're all the same. We'll remember once we close our eyes to see that such distances were never meant to be. Call it God, call it Spirit, call it Jesus, call it Lord, call it Buddha, Baha'u'llah, Hashem or heaven's door. It's Mohammed, it's your mind, it's your soul or it's your sign. It's the universe, it's music, Mother Earth or Father Time. But whatever name you give it, it's all one power, can't you see? Whatever name you give it, it's the very air we breathe. Oh, it's the power of the love in you and me. One power, one power. One power's what we are. One power. One power. One power. It's the moment of creation. It's an everlasting peace. It's the freedom of forgiveness. It's the sweetness of release. It's the joy of inspiration. It's the sunshine on your face. It's the birthright of all nations. It's the boundlessness of space. It's the beauty of a baby. The serenity of sleep. It's the anger we abandon. For it's love that's most deep. Is what power. One power. What we are is one power. It's the power of the love that lives forever in you and me. It's the power of the love in you and
Thank you, Bill and Todd and Kent and Brian. Woo. Yes. And for those of you watching on Facebook, you know you can applaud on Facebook. Just go to the bottom and hit lots of hearts. Their talent, their giving of their spirit is worthy of many hearts on Facebook. So I'm going to be watching Facebook, people. We are glad to have you here with us on Facebook and those who will watch during the week, and of course, everybody in this room today. Well, today we almost finish up our series on the world religions and how they relate to unity. What is that golden thread of truth that runs through all of humanity's belief systems that binds us, that is the same for all of us? And next week we'll tie it all together in a little package called the Unity Way. But today we're going to look at probably one of the most misunderstood religions in the world today, Islam. Now, I bet most of you have some sort of preconceived ideas of what Islam is all about based on our world today. And I'm here to tell you that is not Islam. The things you hear on the news and the media and social media and all of that, yes, there are people who do those things, but they cannot be called Muslims. Because the very word Muslim means one who adheres to the teaching of the prophets, and Muhammad in particular. And one of those teachings is, you shall not kill. You shall not commit violence against any other human being. Unless it's in self-defense. But so what is Islam? Where did it come from? What are its real beliefs? And there are many people around the world who practice the real beliefs of Islam. There are communities in the Middle East that you'll never hear about on the news where Muslims and Christians and Jews work side by side, play together, work together, create together. I remember a couple years ago, we took my grandson to Washington, D.C., and we came back from Mount Vernon, and we landed Washington Harbor, I think, or National Harbor it's called, and there was a beach there where there was lots of people playing together, and a giant screen TV where they were watching the girls' international basketball championships. I mean, a whole community. And I looked, and there was Muslim women kicking balls with Christians and Jews and people of all different colors. That's the true practice of all spirituality, oneness. So in our series, we have looked at the world's religions in a kind of a chronological order, because truly one belief system leads to an evolution of the next one and the next one and the next one. They are all tied together. We started with the most ancient religions that we are aware of. And we went on the eastern side of the tree of religion, looking at Hinduism and Buddhism. We didn't get too much into Taoism and Confucianism. Technically, they're not even really religions. They are philosophical practices. There's other Shinto and Tenriko in Japan. And then on the western side of the tree of religion, there's Judaism, of course, Christianity, which of course split into Eastern and Western Christianity, and then all the different denominations, and there's literally hundreds of denominations. And then on that same western side of the tree is Islam, which also has many different denominations. Most of what we are aware of is Sunni and Shia because they are the two biggest. And unfortunately in the West, mostly what we are aware of is radical Islamic belief or practice. Just like there's radical Christian practice. We've seen a lot of it in our country lately. It's everywhere. But there's also those who practice the true belief. So we're going to look at what Islam is, how it developed, why it developed, and what we have in common. The first thing to know is that the very word Islam means submission to God. It means God is my authority. God is my source. God is everything we believe, our energy, our mind. And when we submit to the will of God, it's an act of coming into alignment with God, to being God expressing as you on earth. And of course, the word Muslim applies to somebody who truly practices Islam and is submissive to God. There are 1.9 billion Muslims in the world today. Only a small fraction of those are the ones we hear about in the news. Most are very devout. And how many of you, who could guess where most Muslims in the world live today? Take a guess. Europe, United States, Indonesia. It's where most of them live today. 1.9 billion. Up until a couple years ago, it was the second largest religion in the world. Now, because of the exodus out of traditional Christianity that we've seen the last couple years, it is now the largest religion in the world. Who founded Islam? Well, most people would say Muhammad. And indeed, he did. However, he is not considered a deity. He is considered a teacher in Islam, just as Adam, Abraham, Jesus, Moses, Isaac, all of the prophets of the Old Testament, and notice I said Jesus as well. They are all venerated and respected and learned from, considered teachers and prophets. The books for the Islamic people are the Quran, which mostly does not say what media says it says. It is essentially very much like our Old Testament. In fact, parts of it are our Old Testament. And so if they say, well, it's filled with violence, read the Old Testament. It's the same book. Other books, there's 5 sacred books in Islam. The first is the Quran. The second is the Tawrat, or just the Arabic word for the Torah. The next one is Zabur, which is Psalms. And here's the interesting one. Injil is the 4th book. And Injil consists of what they call the Gospels of Jesus. Many of the Gospels that we read, including the Gospels of Barnabas and the Gospel of Thomas. For those of you who may not be aware, originally there were 42 Gospels. And they narrowed it down in the Canon Bible at the Council of Nicaea to 4. So they incorporate other Gospels, just like we do in Unity, because there is wisdom in all of those. And the final book is the Sunnah, or the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. But how did Islam come about? You have to put yourself in the world of the 7th century in Arabia, in the Middle East. Rome was pretty much a mess. It barely was hanging on at that point. Just little bits and pieces of it scattered around. The world was in a mess. And Arabia, in particular, was split up into many different tribes, each tribe having their own deity, their own idea of God. There was a lot of fighting between them. Even as they worked together and lived together, they would fight over religion. Some things never change. And into this world, Muhammad was born. Now, Muhammad had a Catholic mother and a Bedouin father. So his father's side of the family practiced the different idol worship and everything that the Arab peoples did. His mother was Catholic. His father died when he was very young, and he was raised by his uncles. His mother went and lived in a convent. So he had a little bit of all of this. Furthermore, as he was growing up, he was part of his uncle's caravan, which would go to China and India and back. So he was exposed to Buddhism and other religions as well. We don't know a lot about his childhood, except we do know that he was regarded as being very wise. And the event that brought him into the forefront of the people's awareness around him was when he was about 15, 16 years old, and everybody had gone to Kaaba to worship. There was a tent there, and inside the tent were the idols of all of the various tribal gods. And of course, the first thing we do when you come to a tent in the desert that hasn't been occupied in a year, this was an annual event, is you have to clean it out. And to clean it out, you have to empty it out. Well, he watched it all, as all his various uncles and all the leaders of these various tribes were fighting over who got to carry their idol out first, because that was the place of honor. And he'd probably witnessed this year after year after year, and these were passionate battles. And Muhammad, when he was about 15 years old, the stories go, stepped up and said, wait a minute. All of your idols are on that one mat, that one rug, that carpet. Everybody grab a piece and lift it up together and carry it out. And they began to realize, hey, this kid's got something going on up here. This kid's smart. And they began seeking him out on matters of justice and to settle disputes and things like that. And as he grew into this and he began to see what was going on in the world and in his culture in particular, he witnessed the poverty, the struggles that the people were going through. And he said, there's got to be a way if we could only learn to work together. And so he went apart and meditated for 40 years. There's that number 40 again. We don't know if it was actually 40 years. But whether it was 40 years or on his 40th birthday or just after a period of time, in the cave in Haraj, he received a message from God. And that message was, there is no God but God. And there are the prophets, the teachers. And so he went back and he said, he started teaching this, started sharing it with all these various tribal leaders. And eventually he said, let's put a symbol in the center of the tent that represents the God that shows up as all these different statues. And over a course of time, they finally let that go until there's only the black rock that is there to this day, they say. Now, why is that important? The black rock has no form. It's just whatever they found out in the field. According to legend, it's a meteorite. We don't really know. But it has no form. Why? Because he wanted something that would depict God without putting a face on it, without saying, well, God looks like my deity, or this or that, the old man with the beard, or what have you. God is indescribable. It is energy. And that is what he began to teach. And he began to unite the people of the Arab world for the first time in their history. And out of that, he died in 632. By 632, all of the tribes were pretty much all united in this teaching called Islam. And out of that grew the Islamic Empire of the 9th century, an empire that brought us mathematics. The very word algebra is the name of the mathematician who came up with it. A lot of us didn't really like him that much in school, but science. Huge advances in science were made in the 9th century in the Muslim world. And originally, equal rights was and still really is a part of it. Serving the poor, helping the poor, exploration, music, literature. Some of the greatest literature the world has ever known has come out of the Middle East. The writings of Rumi, of Gibran, and so many others. So what was this teaching that he brought to the Arab world? The first, of course, is the core value of Islam. There is no God but God. In unity, we would say, there is only one presence and one power, God. There is no physical form that God takes. The closest thing they have to the Muslim symbol is the crescent and the star, which doesn't represent God, or this right here, which is inscribed with 100 names of God that are found in religions around the world, because it's all one. So Islam restored to its people this idea of oneness, this idea of a God that was ever present, that was always present, always at hand. And they accepted that Buddha, Jesus, and specifically the Middle Eastern prophets were all teachers of God. So if you were to walk into a mosque today where they truly practice Islam, you might hear them reading about Jesus and looking at the teachings of Jesus, because he was just as important as Muhammad. So that's a very brief background of where it came from. He established the headquarters at Medina, and that today is considered the center of the Islamic world. He established the Constitution of Medina, which, first of all, allowed every group in Medina to practice their own belief system without fear of persecution. And then it also set up a community where the Muslims could practice their belief system without fear of persecution. So that's Islam. That's what it did. But what does it teach? Well, one of the first teachings is, as I said, there is no God but God, and the word they use for God is Allah. Now, Allah is not a separate word, a separate God. It is simply Arabic for God. If you go to the Middle East, you will hear Christians who speak Arabic, because that's the language of that area, who speak Arabic say Allah. You will hear Jews who speak the language say Allah. It's simply Arabic for God. They also believe there is only God. Everything and everyone is a creation of God. There is no God but God. God is omnipresent, omniscient, and omnipotent. There can be no forms, no statues or paintings of God, because that would be to put God in a box. I kind of like that idea. Take God out of the box. The most common attribute that they assign to God is, in Arabic, Ar-Rahman. Ar-Rahman. And it means the entirely merciful. Entirely merciful. Meaning no judgment. Just like we believe in unity, God does not judge us. We are created in the image and likeness of God. We are created with the attributes of God on a smaller scale. We are God expressing as us, growing and evolving. There are no intermediaries. There is nobody between God and individual humanity. Just as we believe, God is in our hearts, at hand. Thus, even though they have leaders, they are not considered clergy. Your consciousness is one with God. And achieving that consciousness is called taqwa. That's that oneness, that personal relationship with God. And finally, the word Allah is non-gender specific. There is no gender involved at all. God is all-encompassing. Their holy books, as I said, is the Quran, 114 chapters, 6,236 verses, broken into several sections. The first are the Meccan chapters, Meccan meaning Mecca, concerned with spiritual topics. The Medinine chapters, which discuss and clarify legal issues relevant to the Muslim community, just like Leviticus and Deuteronomy did to the early Jews. And then there are the other books written by various prophets and teachers, including many of the Gospels. But most important to a Muslim are the 5 pillars of Islam. The first is Shahada, which is the declaration of faith. It's their mission statement, their belief statement, if you will. And basically it says that I believe that there is no deity except God, and I testify that Muhammad is the messenger of God. The second pillar is as-salah, or prayer. Prayer is seen as the personal spiritual connection to God. And they require 5 times of praying a day. Not because something drastic and nasty is going to happen to you if you don't do it. They don't believe in that. But they do recommend 5 times a day. And the prayers are recited in Arabic, facing the Kaaba. And the reason that they do that is because, number one, by prostrating themselves, they take their attention away from the world around them, from the material world. It's an act of turning within. And by aligning themselves with the Kaaba, their center of their spirituality on the planet, they're aligning themselves with God in consciousness. And then, of course, the prayer is the connection to God. The next pillar is zakat, or almsgiving, similar to tithing. However, it must be used for freeing captives, relieving the debt of others, assisting stranded travelers regardless of faith. For those employed to collect the zakat, somebody's got to do it. What it does and what it did from the very beginning was create, for the first time, really in pretty much the whole world, a social safety net for the population. In fact, today, UN studies say that the tithes given through zakat are 15 times greater than the totality of all other humanitarian donations received in the world annually. The act of giving is seen as an act of purification of one's excess wealth and a recognition that Allah is the source of all wealth. We believe the same thing. God is our source. It comes through many channels, but it is our source. And when we give back, we put ourselves in the flow of that good. Exactly what they believe. And the final, or not the final act, but the next act is fasting. During Ramadan, which just ended, they fast from sunrise to sunset. Now, interestingly enough, we think of Islam as being an authoritarian religion. You have to do these things. No. It's a very graceful, understanding religion. Children, elderly, those who have health issues are not required to do the fast. But I will tell you one story that I witnessed. When I was teaching school many years ago, I had a couple students who were Muslim. And of course, Ramadan that year just happened to fall around Christmas. And you know, us Westerners, when we celebrate Christmas, what do? We have lots and lots and lots of food. So the kids were coming to school every day, the non-Muslim kids, with cookies and candy and treats and all of this kind of stuff. And of course, the Muslim kids wouldn't touch it, wouldn't eat it. And even though they, as children, they could have, but they didn't. And I have to say, our kids, well, they were all our kids, but our kids who were non-Muslim saw this and asked them, why won't you eat our food and all of this? And they told them. And they made the conscious choice to fast with them and not eat and by the way, the fast is sunrise to sunset. So after sunset, they can eat. So our kids would take their food home and eat it. And then the last day of Ramadan, Eid, all of the kids got together and made a feast for the Muslim kids to break it. That's the way it's supposed to work. And in many places in the Middle East, that is the way it works. Muslims will often watch over Jewish communities while they are in their Sabbath. And the Jews in those communities will watch over their Muslim neighbors while they're in Sabbath. They watch out for each other. They respect each other. They understand each other. We need to do more of that in the West. The last pillar is the Hajj. Now, Hajj, we think of Hajj as a war. It's not. Hajj is a pilgrimage. And physically, if you are able, as a Muslim, and have the means, you are expected to make a Hajj or a pilgrimage to Mecca. And there's a lot of ritual. The whole ritual of the pilgrimage is recreating the story of the family of Abraham and their wanderings, because Abraham is seen as their patriarch. You spend a day and night camping on the plains of Mina praying, a day at Mount Ararat, a night on the plains of Muzdalifah, and then to Jamarat where you stone the devil. That kind of sounds like fun. And then, of course, to the Kaaba where you do the walking around the tent. You know, I read that and I thought, wow, that actually sounds kind of fun. Except it's very crowded and hot. So that's Islam. But how does it relate to unity? What do we have in common? Well, we've kind of touched on a few things. The first, of course, is fairly obvious. It's an Abrahamic religion. Unity is part of the Abrahamic religion. That means we trace our lineage back to Abraham and all of the teachers and prophets that came through it. So it has its roots in Judaism and Christianity. But how is it similar in other ways? Well, let's look at the 5 pillars. First of all, there is no God but God, and Jesus and Muhammad, etc., are his prophets. As I said, we say all the time, there is only one presence and one power in my life. God, the what? Good. Omnipotent. Yes. We see Jesus as a teacher and a prophet. We see Buddha as a teacher and a prophet. We see Muhammad as a teacher and a prophet, and so many others. What it is a lineage of Christs Charles Fillmore wrote that every major figure throughout literature in Christianity from from Adam on, is a more fully formed Christ in expression. So Adam was a very early form, a very, beginning. And each one got closer and closer and closer until Jesus. So we see that lineage. God is transcendent. God transcends all of creation. James Dillett Freeman wrote this: God in his entirety is beyond our power to touch or grasp or understand. We are God expressing, but God is even more than we can understand. God is within all of us. And of course, prayer. What is prayer? Well, in unity, it is the core of what we do. It is how we started. And when we pray, we seek to come into alignment with the divine mind, with the divine consciousness. And we go into meditation so that we can take our attention off the material, physical world around us and become one with God for a time. Francis Folks, unity minister and author, wrote this about prayer: true prayer is communion with God. It is communion to take on the spiritual quality of God's thoughts. And if we would meet the great giver, we must turn within and behold him face to face. Prayer is not a means of reaching God or seeking help from God. For the very thought of prayer and the mind that prays is God. When in unity, we don't pray to God, we pray God. We bring that divine knowledge, that divine knowing into expression and speak it out into the world. Prayer is our response to our needs even before we ask. And then there's almsgiving. We call it tithing in unity. It's a spiritual principle found in every single one of the world's religions, and now it is even backed up by science. Science is proving that when we give back in some way to the universe, there's an exchange of energy that happens. Studies have shown that not only do you become more prosperous, but you are healthier and live longer. And you bless the world around you at the same time. It is putting ourselves in the flow of energy, and everything is energy. Think about an electric circuit. You have your source of energy that flows through, lighting light bulbs and doing all that stuff, and as long as there is flow, everything works. But when you are out of that flow, when that flow is broken, there's no light. Good metaphysical lesson there. We tithe at this church. We have always been a tithing church. We tithe to Unity Worldwide Ministries, Unity South Central Region, Silent Unity, and Albuquerque Interfaith, and once in a while others. Charles Fillmore and Myrtle Fillmore tithed from day one in Unity. It is a spiritual teaching that all religions actually practice. How else can we tithe? Well, we tithe by providing resources for spiritual growth. We tithe by supplying space for 12-step groups, counseling service, praying with people, our youth ed, and we'll find more ways as we grow. In fact, I'll be talking about some of those after at the town hall. And finally, fasting. What is fasting? How do we don't say you have to fast in unity, but we teach fasting. We teach fasting from negative thinking. Fasting from speaking words that are destructive instead of uplifting and creative. And finally, the Hajj, the pilgrimage. The pilgrimage is what we do every day in unity. It is our inner journey. Our inner soul growth. It is the studying we do, the community we have, sometimes communion too. It is growing spiritually. It's that focus that we have. You know, most of Christianity and most of the world's religions that are not practiced in depth are outer directed. We see it a lot in our own culture, where the predominant religion of the day is focused on converting other people to think like we do. But spirituality is clarifying our thinking, and so is Islam. Unity is inner-directed. changing ourselves through prayer and meditation and education. And there's so much more I could say to Islam. There's Islamic metaphysics, just like we have unity metaphysics. And that was largely where the advances of the Muslim world in the 9th and 10th centuries came from. But ultimately, the core idea of Islam is the core idea of all the world's religions, and that is peace. As I said, you cannot call yourself a Muslim if you practice violence of any kind towards any other person. It is actually illegal in Islam to initiate war. It is illegal to kill another person. And so, in recognition of these oneness, these similarities we have, I would like to close with an Islamic prayer for peace. And I invite you, close your eyes and understand something. Arabic, I'm going to say it first in Arabic and then I will say it in English. Arabic is almost the language that Jesus spoke when he was teaching on the streets. Arabic is simply modern Aramaic. And so listen to these words and allow yourself to feel the energy of these words and the spirit. Bismillah al-Rahman al-Rahim. Ahmad l'Rabi Akan. Aladi kalachna wajlana. Kabayil wa umaman. Hata naraf badana al-Bad. Lahata nakra badana al-Beda. Ida maulahu aladedu ila aslam. Fahal tamal aidan ila aslam. Watawakal aleha Allah. La ana al-Rabba. Hu aldi yusme. Wayarif kula shaya. Wakhadam Allah. Al-Rahman hom Aladdin. Ya Mushwan Allah al-Ard. Bitawadu. Wendama nukhabiyam. Nakul as-Salam. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Praise be to the Lord of the universe who has created us and made us into tribes and nations that we may know each other, not that we may despise each other. If anyone inclines to be an enemy, incline towards peace. And trust in God, for the Lord is the one that hears and knows all things. And the servants of God most gracious are those who walk the earth in humility. And when we address them, we say peace. Amen. Allahu Akbar.
I am called to be a healer for all humanity. I am called to be a dreamer, believe in what can be. I am called to be a maker, be an instrument of peace. I am called to be a giver, of abundance I receive. I am called to be a prayer, living out the truth I seek. I am called to be everything. I am called to be the glory here on earth, so all might see all the love and all the beauty that shines in you and me. I am the living, breathing God, and you are one in me. I am called to be. You are called to be strength in times of need. You are called to be a neighbor, see a friend in all you meet. You are called to be a leader, to build community. You are called to be a prayer, living out the truth you seek. You are called to be everything. You are called to be. Called to be the glory here on earth, so all might see all the love and all the beauty that shines in you and me. You are the living, breathing God, and you are one in me. You are called to be. We are called to be the kindness, set the brokenhearted free. We are called to be forgiveness, where pain has run too deep. We are called to be compassion, be the wind beneath each wing. We are called to make communion, only then can we succeed. We are called to be a prayer, living out the truth we seek. We are called to be everything. We are called to be. Called to be the glory here on earth, so all might see all the love and all the beauty that shines in you and me. We are the living, breathing God, and you are one in me. We are called to be. Called to be peace, called to be joy, called to be love. We're called to be peace, called to be joy, called to be free. We're called to be peace, called to be joy, called to be love. We're called, we're called, we're called, we're called, we're called. Called to be peace, called to be joy, called to be love. We're called to be peace, called to be joy, called to be love. We're called, we're called, we're called, we're called. We're called to be.
All right, Bill Thanks.